Welcome everybody to the Mason County District Library. Those of you that are here live, welcome everybody on Zoom. I'm glad you're here for the program tonight.
This helps because of all these people covering you up over here.
It does work well. This is the second set of the Cairns and Beacons programs. The first one was Elizabeth Minich. This one will feature Miriam Laker. And then we'll go on from here. It's a great program, a great series that we have set up. I'm here to welcome you to this space, welcome you online, and welcome Brooke Portman, who is our leader, our instigator, if you will, in this program. This would not be happening without her guidance, without her influence, without her pushing and pulling us along in the process. Brooke has been involved in the arts since the very beginning. Most recently, we did the Shifting Landscapes program together. Before that, she led a team of faculty at the West Shore Community College to create the Humankind series. And I could talk for hours about, about all of the arts that she's been involved in and all that she has done. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm just going to hand the mic over to her and let her introduce our speaker tonight.
Oh, there it is. All right. I didn't know whether I unmuted myself or you did. So, well, thanks, Thomas. As Thomas said, I am Brooke Portman, the director of Abondia Center and the cohort in crime in both Shifting Landscapes and in this series. So I need to get some of this off. There we go. So I can see folks. Well, boy. The first thing that we want to do, both Thomas and I, is to actually thank our funders, the Michigan Humanities and the Michigan Arts and Cultural Council. But it actually would not happen without you, the taxpayers, because the Michigan Humanities money comes from the federal government through our taxes. And the Michigan Arts Council money comes through state taxes. So you're paying for this event tonight. You did a long time ago, but thank you very much. So and to both the humanities. They're no longer the council, and I always want to say Humanities Council, but they're just the humanities. So let us begin. Thomas did have showing before the QR code, sort of just if you have comments, it'd be great to get them on there at the end of the program. There are several themes that have been guiding us through this series, and perhaps they'll guide you as well. Clearly, the first theme is found in our title, Cairns and Beacons. I didn't know what a Cairns was. But when I heard it, it was like, that is perfect. So a cairn, they're familiar to hikers, is a mound of stones that sits generally on the ground, signaling it's the start of a path. So it's a path perhaps just to the next point in time, or it's a path to the destination. But it says, take this and you'll be safe and you can get to where you're likely going. And beacons is more familiar to all of us. It's something that's more in the sky. It can be a lighthouse, it can be a star, or it can be more metaphorical. It's a dream, it's a vision, it's a goal that we have in mind. We might hear it from somebody on TV that's doing something that we go, oh, when I grow up, I want to do that. That's a beacon. It's our solid belief that because of our experience during this whole program and developing it, is that cairns and beacons are all around us. When we first started putting the series together, it was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Where are the resources? Well, that would be a great topic, but how could we ever find somebody to talk about it? And we kind of took a deep breath and said, just keep looking. And then all of a sudden things would turn up. And or we had what we wanted to do and we didn't, and we invited a speaker and they said no. And it was like, oh my gosh, it's crashing in. And it was like, no, that wasn't supposed to be our speaker. hold on, the right speaker will come forward. And it might sound a little voodoo to everyone, but that's exactly what happens and what has happened. So the second theme is something that many of us forget, as we did. So if you ever pledged during COVID that, and when it was over, that you wanted to make the world a better place, but instead, before you started, you felt exhausted. It wasn't, and you thought it was too huge to undertake, that you were a busy person. How could you add anything more to your plate? How could any of us make a big difference on a big thing? The fact is, small things count. And we'll say it often throughout this series, because for some reason, we all forget that it is so. Some of you know that when we found ourselves mired in all of this, we can't do it, we don't know how can we create, and then the other kind of double whammy for us was, how can we create a series that we hope will give people some ideas about some things that they want to do to make the world a better place, when what we're saying right now to ourselves, we don't have time to make the world a better place. We ran into this statement that that it's a very brief one, so I used it both last week and I'll bring it back this week, but then give us a new one. But one of the statements that we both said over and over, and it appeared in our grants, was from Rebecca Henderson, who is a Harvard business faculty member, Harvard School of Business faculty member. And she got it from someone when she said, I am so busy. I mean, how can we have, she's working with businesses. Let me step back a minute. Anything from 50-person businesses to a business like Nike, with thousands of employees and huge power in the world. And it was like, how can she help those, places change? She's just one person. And what the person said to her was, what you need to know is all you need to do is to be a pebble in an avalanche of change. A pebble is enough, because with a whole lot of pebbles, you can indeed make change in the world. So tonight, I also want to share one from a different angle. And there are all kinds of inspiring ideas that help us stay on the path that small is okay. Small is actually how you get things done. And this is from the American historian Howard Zinn. Now, Zinn was writing in 1994. And so I point that out because it reminds us, like almost 30 years ago, that we don't actually live in an unusual time. People in all times and decades think big changes are needed and that they aren't enough and they can't do it. But they are, and we are. Every step, even half baby steps, count. Here's what Howard Zinn said in 1994. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. Human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we only see the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should be, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. So one can just think back to this past week and House of Representatives is, and a lot of other things. And we think we're in chaos, and we're not. We just need to keep at it. So speaking of marvelous victories in small steps, we have invited tonight Dr. Miriam Laker, whom you'll see in a moment, who is the research director at the nonprofit giving circle Give Directly, to share with us the story of different cash transfer programs. Now, cash transfer programs, and I may also have made up my own series of definitions from the various things I've read. And so Miriam may want to sort of like clarify things. But cash transfer programs are programs where cash is provided directly to people, generally without restrictions on how the funds are used. These go under various names with slightly different delivery methods and purposes. The ones most discussed are usually universal basic income, where every person, regardless of their income, receives a cash transfer, or a guaranteed income program, where people meeting certain criteria related to poverty or need, that is to say, receive a cash transfer. So universal basic income, everybody gets it, and they're very expensive, or guaranteed income, where the people who are poor get it. And we can talk, and Miriam can talk about why Give Directly recommends one or the other. But Give Directly has been developing cash programs, cash transfer programs for more than 10 years. During this time, it has been strongly committed to conducting careful research on the methods and outcomes of these programs, which are still, especially here, somewhat controversial mechanisms for addressing poverty, in spite of the purported effectiveness. Important to know is that Give Directly has been cited as one of the top 10 most innovative companies in finance 4 times. As you may know, more than 60 cities and communities in the US are considering developing or have developed such programs or will develop such programs. But the problem is they have really only been pilot programs, many of them running less than a year, and only a few having enough funds, really, steam, to run up to even 3 years. So this has been, between the length of time to gather research and the lack of funding for the program itself, much less any research, there's very little that folks can look to say, okay, this is what we accomplished here in the US. So because we can't get to the questions that, that a lot of us are asking on all sides of the aisle. Do such programs change lives? Do people go from cash transfer programs to jobs and livelihoods on their own 2 feet? So it is because Give Directly has been in this business of universal basic guaranteed income or cash transfer programs for 10 years. And because research has been and continues to be a high priority, we have asked Dr. Miriam Laker to join us tonight. Welcome, Miriam. I have a few things to say about you, and then the podium is yours. But welcome. I love the work in the back, back over your right shoulder, by the way. And
thank you.
Bicycle folks and all of that. But anyway, moving on. So, folks, Miriam Laker is a physician and clinical researcher. She has more than a decades experience working in academia and the nonprofit sector. Miriam is a member of the board of directors of a network of more than 90 organizations engaged in research and humanitarian cash and voucher assistance programs, as we are exploring tonight. She is also the author of children's books, and in 2016 was named one of Uganda's top 40 women over 40. And before I completely give the podium to Miriam, for those online, please feel free to place any questions in the chat. I will keep Miriam informed of any of the questions. And for anyone in the live libraries, please either you or the librarian who's there enter a question into chat, and so we can keep track of it. And now we are pleased to welcome Miriam Laker to Cairns and Beacons, Finding Our Way in the Post-COVID World. And let's all do so in deep, deep, deep gratitude to you, Miriam, because Uganda is where Miriam is right now, and it is about 7 hours from now. So she's in the middle of her night. You look stunning. You look very awake. So thank you very much for being here with us in Michigan, Miriam Laker.
Thank you very much, Brooke. Thank you for a beautiful introduction. And to everyone who is listening to me, it's just lovely to know that you are on the other side. In the pre-COVID world, we probably would have had this in an in-person setting. Thank God for technology. We're able to be together even when we're thousands of miles apart from each other. Before I introduce myself and the work we do, I'm just going to start with a short video because I believe that a video and a word speaks much more than any of us could ever do. So in the next 3 minutes, we're going to watch this video, which is part of the essence of what we do at my organization. Are you seeing my screen now? Brooke, let me know when you are able to see my screen. I was
seeing it. I see you now. I did see that there it is.
Yes, there it is.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure I share the sound.
Thomas, are you there? Did you do any assistance at this point?
I think I'm still fine. There we go.
Kama bayo kakukula kali basi kushebulia lilo bali atandika kuunya yaunya ingali uja basi angaba
ngoni byambaso bibilwe kuba ya miroko binu bingi nabi imwanyisi nabani naye.
Shisese and William live on Mount Elgon, Uganda, where worsening rains are causing deadly landslides.
Climate change. Africa is responsible for only 3% of global emissions. And yet Africans are already suffering some of the most brutal impacts fueled by the climate crisis.
Simbera tili kunusa muchifa shino lwetsi ngurule nakulonda amata ufuna shinu nyoa.
Ata habe mwanga mamulisai khakuche nina ifukirira.
Many could adapt to climate change if they were given the money to do so, which is why Give Directly does just that, sending cash donations directly to people on the front lines, no strings attached.
Wareba barambari bona shifu shishini ma imbrani ngakufuna mashifa shekhu menyo
tinta bakabanda niyo chakachata ndi tino tikanatolena kaku ndithu imfa zambi zikanapezeka iposi tukayikira konse kunokono anthu akanatupa kudzera ano mbuku mwanga mukuoneka beso kuti no 252 manyumba amene amangidwa anthu kukhoza.
As we work to reduce future emissions, we also have an obligation to help those suffering now, especially when so many disasters are predictable, like in Mozambique, where over 1 million suffer worsening annual cyclones.
Mazi akazala ntochira kapakuka muno ndaife tisatabuka maningi tisasofere kuvunde nene ngakana kumida nditangu ikulu menike tikefa zuzumika pia kapenseni ife satabuka na mazi.
Farmers in Malawi are using their money to adapt their crops for the changing climate.
Ndipo olokwa ine ndinapindula ifwa ndinapita nawo ina kumunda alangizana tipusa kuti tizisala chimanga cho chansanga inatha mwezi umozi kuyamba kuchita ngayaya kumene tathandizika ine kuti mwina ndikudaliranso kuti mwina izipitizabe kundithandiza kuchokera ku ndalama ya Give.
Cash also helps those suffering prolonged drought, like the one gripping southern Kenya.
Ni kama vile unaona kumekauka, mvua ilipeza kitambo kunyesha. Tuko na karibu season kama 4 hivi bado hatujapata chochote kwa mashamba.
Tuliamua tuweke maji yenyewe kwa iko na shida. Ukikosa pale mferejini unaenda Bamba, na huko Bamba ni mbali.
Na huu msaada ulipokuja kabidi sasa ushauri wa kwanza uwe wa mimi nataka kuweka mfereji hapa.
Sasa naona vizuri. Kama pesa imetoka pale sinanunulia chakula watoto wangu na ndanunua vitu naweka pale kwenye duka.
As world leaders work towards big solutions, millions in poverty have ideas for small ones. They simply can't afford them. Give directly to someone on the front lines of climate change. Your money will help them survive a crisis they did not create.
Okay, so once again, I believe that a video or pictures tell more than 1,000 words. And I think for me, that video, many other videos, but more my experience with people in poverty is the reason I do the things I do. I'll introduce myself and give you the perspective from which I come from. I was born and grew up in Uganda, in the capital city of Uganda. I didn't know until I was 20 that we grew up in a very privileged setting. I went to Catholic school in my preschool, then went to a public school, and then went to an exclusive all-girls Catholic school. And what was interesting was I grew up thinking my family was a poor family until I was 20 years old and went to medical school. My medical school was in the National Referral Hospital, which is the largest hospital in the country. And when I got there, it was the first time I noticed that people could not afford even the most basic medicines they needed for their illnesses. And for me, that was a reality check. Looking back, I realized that I thought we were poor growing up because of the relativity of the people that lived around us. An example is one of our next door neighbors was the US Embassy. We had people who were executives with Shell living around us. My father used to work with PepsiCo, but because he wasn't the highest paid of the whole bunch, I thought we were a poor family. What I'm trying to say is our sense and understanding of wealth or poverty depends on what we have been subjected to. One of the things we learned in medical school was the eyes see what they know. Once you know about something, you begin to see it around you more than usual. And so that experience I had as an undergraduate student in medical school made me make a decision at that young age to work with people in poverty. I have actually never worked in a private institution. I've only worked with institutions that support people living in poverty. It was a decision I made as a result of that realization. So after my medical school, my first place of work was in a part of Uganda that had been in turmoil for over 20 years. And so I worked in a mission hospital there, people living in abject poverty. And when I was done with that, the HIV pandemic was at its peak in the country. And so my next posting for several years was HIV, working to get HIV treatment to people. I then trained in the UK, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and then had my final training in the US, University of California in San Francisco. Within that setting, I began to do work in research, HIV and malignancies and cancers related research. But what I found out in this work was that people who were poor had worse outcomes than people who weren't poor. There is something I read many years ago that said birth is the first lottery. The circumstance of your birth, unbelievable, determines a lot of what happens to us. I've been doing research for close to 20 years now, and it is absolutely obvious that outcomes are related to whether people are poor or they're not poor. And so even in the context of doing medicine and trying to help people, I found that I was helpless. I mean, people either came in too late because they either had to sell something to come to the hospital, and even when they came to the hospital, they had to sell property to get the medication that they needed to get. And that's absolutely painful decisions that people had to make. A few years ago, I then came across this concept called unconditional cash transfers. And I was like, no way in hell does it work. You cannot give people money and think that things are going to change. I was like, absolutely no way in hell. And so being the researcher that I am, I went online and said, show me the evidence. And I just couldn't believe how much evidence was pouring out. And then I come across this organization called Give Directly, and they were looking for a research director. And I was like, pick me, I have to do this. And I remember walking into the interview and saying, you know, I may not be an economist, but I know research very well, and I am a very dedicated person. Long story short, I am now the research director at Give Directly. What I'm trying to say is because of what I have experienced by interacting with people in poverty, working with people in poverty, I have seen that people make decisions that they make because of where they are. Before I go straight to I'm going to have a few slides of the work Give Directly does globally. I think this is a great opportunity for you. Some people have never traveled beyond the borders of their country. And so it will be a great opportunity for me to show you what we're doing all over the world. And then I'll have a few slides to show you what we are doing in the United States of America. And I think that is pretty impressive because once you have worked with the people in poverty, then you begin to see things really differently. But also you begin to realize that we are all the same. Recently, I was in the US for what is called the big conference. It's a huge basic income and guaranteed income conference. It was in Chicago. And just interacting with people who live in poverty, a number of them were represented in these meetings. I just said, I mean, what is the difference? It's just that they're different continents, but what people are going through is absolutely the same across the board. So I thought I should give that preamble, and then I will go through a few slides to show you what Give Directly does. The slides are going to be more prompts. I'm going to do a lot of talking. And like Brooke said, if you have a question, if you have a disagreement, I'm very open to that. We believe at Give Directly that we don't know it all. We don't know the answers to everything. Answers are out there in the world. So if you disagree, you're also very welcome to speak up or to share your disagreement on the screen, I mean, in the chat, and we shall definitely talk through that. So, okay. This, I believe you can see my screen, Brooke. You're on mute. I'm just hoping you're saying yes.
There we go. Yeah, are you showing? Yeah, you're showing a phone and cash.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
Excellent. I love this picture because this was the first cash transfer that Give Directly did as a program. You can see the date there, 23rd of October, 2014, the first recipient of Give Directly money, and this was in Kenya. When Give Directly started and our founders talked about the concept, the first big donor was Google, interestingly. And he said when they were called in to talk about this idea that they had, the only question they got at the end of the presentation was, what are you guys smoking? Like, what kind of weed are you on? How do you think you are going to give people money they did not work for, give it to them unconditionally, and think they're going to make a difference in their lives? Early this year, we went for a retreat. We have our retreats in the countries where we work. We went for the directors retreat in Rwanda. Rwanda is in East Africa, one of the countries where we work. And what we do as an organization, because our ethos is recipients first. So we invited the recipients to come to this meeting and we asked them a very crucial question. We said, as a recipient of cash transfers, would you rather that instead of giving you unconditional cash, we gave you cash and gave you training on how to use it? There's a general theory that people in poverty don't know how to use their money. They need to have training in aspirations, in financial literacy, in how to play with their babies to be able to use their money well. And this man said, you know, we as people in poverty, and we believe any human being plans for what they have. If I have just enough money to feed my family, then I'm going to plan for the meals that I can buy with that money. But if I have more money, then I'm going to plan to do much more with the money that I have. And he gave us the example. He said, look at us. There were a panel of about 10 or 12 of them. He said, many of us a year ago would have never dreamt of the things that we're doing now. Because what was important was making sure our children ate, making sure our medical bills were paid, making sure we had a roof over our heads. But ever since we received the money, we have purchased land, we have expanded our businesses, we have started new businesses. No one has to tell us what to do. We know what we need. The only thing is that we are not able to finance our needs. There's a common saying that teach a man to fish, give a man a fish and you will have fed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you will have fed him for a lifetime. But what we are learning now is that people don't need to be taught how to fish. People who live, especially by the river, by the lakes, don't need to be taught how to fish. Many of them are not fishing because they don't have the equipment. Fishing, We have actually seen that play out in the countries where we work. One of our largest projects has been in a place in East Africa, close to the shores of Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is one of the largest freshwater lakes in the world, by the way. When we gave cash transfers unconditionally in these communities, people suddenly were buying nets, buying their own boats. The fishery business just went out through the roof. Like literally people knew how to fish, but they could not afford to fish. They could not afford the equipment that they needed to fish. So that is some of the perspectives that we bring or we have learned as we do this work. So just quickly about Give Directly. The question we keep asking ourselves is, could extreme poverty, not only in Africa, but in the entire world, be eliminated in the course of our lifetime? Right now, according to the most recent evidence from Brookings, the poverty gap is estimated to be about $100 billion. And when you look at, if you break that down in terms of figures, this is just 0.04% of global private wealth. It is 0.12% of global GDP, 65% of the official foreign aid budget, and 21% of the US charitable giving. So just putting that 100 billion, which is a huge amount of money, in perspective of the reality of the world, we noticed that at the poverty line at that time, so Brookings has to update this, but at the poverty line of $1.90, it is now $2.15. Still, the amount is proportionately small compared to the money that goes around the world on an annual basis. So if we dedicated just, for instance, 0.04% of global private wealth to giving cash to everyone below the poverty line every year, we would be able to end extreme poverty. So just giving you a perspective of what that looks like. Now, the way traditional aid works, for those who are familiar, this is going to be very familiar with you. So normally there's a donor on one end. Brooke wakes up this morning and decides, you know what, I'm going to donate to people living in poverty. Most of the time, the pathway is a long, convoluted pathway. So here's Brooke, the donor, gives her donation, it goes into the hands of multilaterals, and then it goes to a global NGO, which then contracts a subsidiary, which subsidiary contracts a local partner, and then eventually the recipient receives the cash. What is happening is the money and the decisions curve is going from high on Brooke's end. So Brooke wanted this $1,000 to go to a household living in poverty in Yemen, for instance, one of the countries we work in. But by the time you go through the entire path to get to this household in Yemen, the decision-making has gone down to almost zero. And the amount of money that actually gets into the hand of the recipient is also close to, unfortunately, close to zero, because there are lots of payments that happen along the way. Now, the way we work at Give Directly is this. Money goes directly from the donor into the pocket of the recipients. So what Give Directly does is we are simply a middle man or a middle woman. The money comes to us from the donors, and we send the money directly into the bank accounts or cell phones of people living in poverty. In most of the countries where we work, we take advantage of the digital technology. There's a system called mobile money, where people literally can use a cell phone as their bank for their saving, for all their cash transactions, without having a formal bank account in a bank. So the phone becomes a formal bank account. We really take advantage of that. In countries like the US, we pay our people in multiple ways, either prepaid credit cards, or money goes directly into people's bank accounts. Consequently, out of every $1 that is donated to Give Directly, 90 cents of it ends up in the pocket of recipients. So we've gotten rid of the convoluted pathway between the donor and the recipient. And then the cash transfers are given unconditionally, meaning we maintain the decision-making that Brooke, who made the donation, has to the recipient. So the decision-making curve remains practically the same, because this is unconditional. Recipients can use the money for what they see fit for them. And the white cloud on the right is extracted from what we have. So you'll see it on our website. It's called Give Directly Live. So normally when people receive cash, we ask them, what did you use your money for? So that's a question to know how people use their money. And the diversity of answers is unbelievable. And these are some of the examples that we have seen, and I will talk more about those as we go along. this is my favorite recipient. And for me, he made me believe that moving away from daily practice of medicine to give directly was the decision I needed to make. This gentleman is in Kenya, Uganda, one of Give Directly's recipients. In the community where he lives, one of the most profitable businesses is goat rearing. So when people got their cash transfers, the majority of the people in his community either bought goats or repaired their houses or made their houses nicer, repaired the roof. Some of them just really rebuilt their houses, which we see a lot of. And so when we met this gentleman, we asked him, how come you haven't made the decision to buy livestock? Why have you not worked on your house? And what this man did, before I give you what he said, what he did was, instead of doing what everyone else was doing, he bought music instruments. He bought music instruments, he bought a public address system, and really put together a music band. And then he hired people to work with him. So already this cash transfer goes out to the community. And this man is already, who was a man living in poverty, now has the ability to hire people. So he becomes an employer. And so he hired people and suddenly has this band. And what happens is his community's economy has been stimulated. People are doing well. And so people are able to afford to celebrate, either go out to dance, or when there's it's Christmas time or whatever festivity time, people are able to organize celebrations. And guess who the musician is at all these functions? This gentleman didn't buy a cow, didn't buy a goat, but didn't prepare his house. But now he's making enough money to do those things further out in the future. And so when we asked him why he made that decision, his answer was, not everybody wants a goat, not everybody wants a house. And so this is what he does in his community right now. So like I've said, we send cash to people living in poverty, completely no strings attached. We are right now in 14 countries and have reached over 1 million recipients. And our partners have been combination of institutions, governments, corporations, and very importantly, and for me, what is really important for me, individual donors, people like you and me who make the decision to extend a hand and help people living in poverty. And this is how our growth curve has been. So 2014 was the remember the photograph that I had on the very first screen, a phone that had received cash. We started at, this is where we started off. And our largest donations came in around 2021 when the COVID pandemic had hit the world. And suddenly people realized that you can help people who are struggling with just with sending them cash transfers. And that is when our US operations started. Our first cash transfers in the US was in the setting of the COVID pandemic, because we had a number of people who were happy to donate, but wanted to donate to help people in their home in the US. And so based on that, we started our operations in the US, which have run since 2021 to date. And I will show you some of the work that we are doing in the US. Very importantly, we use technology in every step of our process. We are really taking advantage of the technological advancements in the work that we do. The first thing we do wherever we work in the world, whether it's in the US, in Uganda, in Rwanda, Morocco, Turkey, whatever it is, we target. By targeting, what we mean is we want to identify people living in poverty who will probably benefit from cash transfers. The model that we have used in most of the lower income countries is what we call a saturation model. And what this simply means is the first thing we do is use an objective data set, usually government census data, because a census is usually done without any ulterior motives. What is on the ground is what is collected and presented. So we can use that to identify communities that are living in poverty. And then what we do is when we go to that community, everyone who lives in that community is eligible for a cash transfer. In a sense, in every community where we have worked, we use a universal income approach. You note that I've left out the word basic. Not all our programs are a basic income project, because one of the things that we want to do and we believe can happen in our lifetime is that global extreme poverty can be ended. And because of that, we generally, in most of our programs, give our recipients a large lump sum cash transfer amount. And why do we do this? The first program in Give Directly was done in the setting of a research project. So Give Directly, unlike many NGOs, has a dedicated research team. And the role of the research team is to generate evidence, around cash transfers, but also to take advantage of evidence that other players in the cash transfer field have developed to inform the way we run our operations and how we advocate for cash transfers. And so in this research study that was the very first project in Give Directly, we found that when you give people a large lump sum cash transfer amount, compared to when you give people that same amount split up over a period of time, the people who receive the large lump sum cash transfer are more likely to, first of all, meet their immediate basic needs. And then they have money left over and they're like, okay, what else can I do with this? And we've seen people invest the money that is left over in productive assets. People have either started new businesses or expanded their businesses. They've purchased assets that can be liquefied at the time they need it for cash, or assets that gain value over time. And so based on that, our general model in most of the countries where we work is that large lump sum cash transfer, in the hope that it will help people graduate out of poverty to a place where they no longer need external assistance. So yes, so after we've identified people, everyone is then eligible to receive cash transfers. And then we enroll them. And by enrollment, we mean we get people's particulars. Who are you? Where do you live? What is your bank account information? Or what is your mobile phone information? So that route through which you would like to receive cash transfers. What we found very interesting in some of the non-US settings where we work, where money is sent through people's phones, people don't even need to have a phone, provided they have a SIM card, you know, that little card that makes a phone work. Some people just have a SIM card and share the phone itself with somebody else, and that is enough. So all we need is you have a mobile phone number, you are connected to the mobile banking system. If not, our teams are trained to help people get set in the mobile banking system. And then once that is done, money is sent to your phone, money is sent to your bank account, and that is it. And so then you have the ability to use it as you want. On the other, in the background, though, after we've sent out cash, that is not the end. We have an internal audit system and a safeguarding system wherever we work in the world. And the use of this is to monitor fraud. One, fraud to make sure that people are not cheated by, first of all, our staff. Two, whoever the money comes through. So like if it's a mobile money agent, we want to make sure that you're not cheated. Three, we want to make sure that you know how to receive the money. Because sometimes money comes into people's phones or people's bank accounts and they don't know how to go about getting that money. And for that, we have people who are physically in the communities. Also, we have toll-free call centers in every country where we work, where people can call and talk about any difficulties that they're facing receiving their money. So we make sure that that is happening on the other end as well. So yes, cash is given out. And one of the first things that people ask when we talk about unconditional cash transfers is, are you sure that people don't waste that money? Are you sure that people don't spend that money on what we call temptation goods, drugs and alcohol? Are you sure that it doesn't make people lazy? What I want to tell you is that cash to date is has the largest evidence base of any anti-poverty intervention in the whole world. I mean, it is actually literally rivaling medical interventions, experimental studies. So to date, there are over 300 rigorous experimental studies on cash transfers. And by rigorous, I mean the experimental studies similar to A/B studies, where people receiving cash that are similar to people who are not receiving cash are compared, and the different outcomes that cash could potentially drive are studied. When you look at this graph, you'll see that out of the 315 rigorous experiments on cash transfers world over, 20 of them have been conducted on Give Directly programs. The way our programs are evaluated is we don't evaluate our programs ourselves because of conflict of interest, because we are the intervention, we are the ones giving cash. So we get external researchers from reputable institutions to evaluate the programs that we're running and to give an independent observation of the evidence that they have seen in the work that we do. So these are some of the projects that we have done that have been evaluated through rigorous research. And you can see in the US, we have the Propel Project 100 was our response to the COVID pandemic in the US. We have a project that is running in Cook County, and there are some others that I'm going to show you when I get to the US slides. These are some of the things that we have seen. People people invest in assets, people invest in food, unbelievable, sometimes the things that we take for granted. We go to households and people say, you know what, we ask them about their dietary intake over the last 1 week. And mothers are choosing to go hungry so their children can eat. And also what their children are eating is like really minuscule, like a bowl of porridge once a day, and that's the entire meal. And this is not just in Africa. In the US, it's unbelievable the things we're seeing. I think for me, what struck me most in the US was when we just started doing our program and the results of the work we did in the pandemic came out. We found that the impact was quite low. In that program, everyone had received $1,000. And then shortly after, another evaluation from another project that wasn't ours came out. And even then, the impact of cash transfers was quite low. And the question was, what is going on? In fact, households that had received up to $2,000 said, when you looked at the evidence that was generated, there was actually a negative impact on those households as far as their psychological well-being was concerned. It made people unhappy. And so when we looked deeper, what we found was that people are living so deeply in debt. The average debt in the US among the recipients of cash transfers was about $35,000. Many of these households were living on under $500 per month. And so it is not surprising that when someone gives you $2,000 in the light of a $35,000 debt, that you would feel desperate. And so those are some of the issues that we are dealing with as an organization. Just a second, I see my baby has woken up. Let me help. Just a second. Thank you. I think my voice woke him up. Okay. Yes, so we quickly found that people were living in such depth of debt that the cash transfers that were being given was not sufficient to make a dent in the debts that they had. And based on this, not only Give Directly, but all players in cash in the US space are now thinking, what is the right amount of money to give to people living in poverty to help them come to a place where they can begin to get out of the trap in which they are. These are some of the key findings. And the other thing that, so Brooke, if my time is running out, just send me a chat to let me know something in the chat. I'd be grateful.
Yep. I have a.
Is that okay? How many more minutes do I have, Brooke?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you, Brooke.
Okay. Yes, we're doing fine on time. Someone did ask the question, so I might as well do it right now. I was just chatting. And that question is, well, let me put it this way. How is Give Directly funded? What I was saying to her was that, as you just said, I could be a donor and my money would be sent through Give Directly to place. What's the percentage that maybe other organizations, are they foundations that support Give Directly and that money is spent? How does that work?
Okay, that's a very good question. So we have, there's a slide that showed that where we had the multiple donors. So we have, first of all, we have individual donors, and individual donors are a whole spectrum. We have high net worth donors, who are people who are like filthy rich, who have donated to our organization. There have been a number of those. And then we also have people who may not be really wealthy, but they want to give. And so they make a donation. Sometimes it's a one-off. Sometimes they decide to set a standing donation where every month they give to people living in poverty. If someone wants to do that, the link is available on our website, where it's really easy. People just make the donations and the donations are tax deductible. The other one is we have institutions that have donated to us, and some continue to do so. Institutions like the NBA, Google, and those kind of institutions. And then we also have other institutional donors like the USAID, IKEA Foundation. So those Save the Children, those kind of organizations are also giving the work that we're doing. So we've just got these multiple donors. I don't have the percentage of the percentage of each of those different groups, but we have those multiple donors. The other thing is for most of the donations that don't come from institutions like USAID, Save the Children, the cash transfers that the money that we get from individual donations are usually unrestricted funding. What this simply means is the money is given to us as an organization, and we make the decision of the best place to send the money. And this has been very helpful because sometimes something may happen. So I'll give an example. There may be a disaster that happens, and because we have this money, we can immediately respond to that disaster. There may be a situation in a country, the example in the video that you saw, the example in Kenya, in Uganda, the Mount Elgon region. So Mount Elgon is in the eastern part of Uganda. It is an inactive volcanic mountain, very rich soils, and a lot of people live on the slopes of these mountains. But over the years, because the volume of rain has increased, really a climate change effect, the volume of rain has increased, there's lots of flooding and therefore landslides. So because we have this unrestricted funding, as an organization, we're able to make a decision and say, you know what, let us put money into that problem. The other funding we get from institutions like USAID, Save the Children, is usually restricted. And by that, I mean, they give us money for a targeted problem. For instance, Save the Children will say, we're giving money for you to give to women, households that have women who are pregnant or children under the age of 2 years. But whatever way the money comes in, we accept it, but on condition that we are permitted to give it to the recipients unconditionally. Isn't that interesting? We have a condition that it should be unconditional. So I hope that answers the question that was asked.
I think that does, yes. There's another one on that, which is how does the staff get funded? What's the administrative, where does the administrative money come from? There is a question that to fund the publicity, just the daily stuff. How is that taken care of?
Well, that's a very good question. Remember, I said, as an organization, we try to make sure that out of every dollar that we receive, 90 cents of that ends up in the pocket of the recipients. Give Directly is one of the leanest organizations that I have worked with before. For instance, our headquarters in New York is actually a shared working space. It's a WeWork, like literally a WeWork. We just have a few rooms hired in a WeWork, and that is where we work. Those of us who belong to what we call the global shared services, like research, for instance, we support the entire organization. We work remotely from home, so reducing overhead costs. In most of the countries where we work, we have a small country office, and we allow people to work remotely, because then we don't have to hire a big office for people to come in and sit, and so thereby pushing up overhead costs. The other thing as an organization is we don't have assets. Assets like vehicles. We don't have it's organizational vehicles. If we need to travel, we use public transportation to go wherever we go. When we fly in airplanes, we travel economy. So those are some of the cost-cutting ways that Give Directly runs, because we believe that and in that list of values, it is recipients first. The money that we receive is meant to go to the recipients. And so that is how we've been able to cut costs as an organization. The hiring decisions go through a lot of really rigorous thinking through, because every person that we hire means that cash that would have gone to recipients has to pay someone's salaries. And therefore, for people to be hired, we need to make the case that hiring this person is going to be good for the recipients. There is a gap that if we don't fill, then the recipients are going to feel the pinch at the end of the day. So that is how stringent the organization is. Our communications team does a lot of communications by reaching out to the press. So a lot of it is done without, so the communications team is paid to do their work, of course, but we try to build relationships with the media. We tell them the work we're doing and ask them and explain to them the stories behind our efficiency, and ask them to help us make our work public. And then we take advantage of the public space as well, LinkedIn, Twitter, which is now called X, Facebook. So forums that are free, we take advantage of these free platforms to showcase our work. Also, we make sure that any travel is really well thought through. First, the carbon footprint, but two, we need to make sure that any travel that is done is absolutely necessary. And so we take advantage of platforms like we're doing right now. Don't require, I would have told Brooke, you know what, if you want me to do this, I have to be in the US. So we try as much as possible to minimize those kind of unnecessary expenses or take advantage of situations where we can spend less money on our administrative work, on our overheads, and make sure that the majority of it goes to the people that are living in poverty. I hope that answers the question.
So far, right now, yes. And if the person has another question, we'll hear. So thank you.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting. It's fascinating, I think.
Great. Okay, so I'll continue.
Yeah.
Great. So that's looking at some of the impacts of our work. So when Give Directly started giving large lump sum cash transfer amounts, the first pushback we got was, you're giving a lot of money to very poor communities, and that is not good for the economy. You're going to drive up prices, you're going to cause inflation, you're going to make people worse off than before. And so because of that, we once again, as an organization that is really heavy into research, we decided, okay, can we get reputable researchers to actually evaluate the impact of our cash transfers on the local economy? And so in a place in Kenya, where every household received $1,000, which was equivalent to 15% of the local GDP, we did a very rigorously designed experimental study. And what we found was pretty interesting. First of all, in addition to like driving the expansion of existing businesses, creating new businesses, improving the quality of life of people who receive cash transfers, the first thing we found was that even households up to 2 kilometers away from the place where we had given cash, so these are households living in poverty, did not receive cash, their consumption was 2 years later was the same as the consumption of the houses that had received cash. What simply meant was that the cash transfers were stimulating the general economy, so much so that even those that didn't receive cash were benefiting to the same extent as those households that had received cash. The other thing we found was that there was a multiplier effect, and it was as high as 2.5 times, simply meaning every dollar that we gave we sent the recipients as cash transfers, it led to, it generated an extra $2.50. Because when people receive money, you don't typically keep your money in your bank and don't use it for anything. You're going to go out to the shops, you're going to go out to the salon, and so you're going to spend your money in the community, and the community is going to spend that money and invest it as well, and thereby the small amounts that we are giving in do not remain the same $1 or $1,000 that we gave, but it multiplied itself up to $2.50 per dollar that we sent out, 2.5 times. And finally, what we found out, which was the reason we did this evaluation in the first place, was that even at a 15%, even with this cash transfer amount being 15% higher than the local GDP, there was practically no inflation, practically no price changes, except in very remote areas where there's a little bit of a price increment in things that are immovable goods like land. But even then, that price change was less than 1%. And for us, that was very consoling, because the approach that we use once again is to give people a large lump sum amount of cash transfers, so that in addition to meeting their basic needs, they have enough to invest, so that the impact of the cash transfers they have received is sustainable. They don't have to continue getting cash for the long haul. Just a summary of cash transfer research evidence, both we've seen that Give Directly and external to Give Directly. We found that it increases the consumption, meaning people's ability to buy food, to send their children to school, pay for their medical bills. It increases assets, and even 10 years after people have received a single transfer, they are still able to get all these positive impacts. Increases income, food security, business ownership, school enrollment, and gender equity. Very important point for me. Also found that cash transfers decreases illness and depression. We've also found that it decreases violence, and by violence, it decreases domestic violence, but also decreases violence. So studies that have been done in Liberia and I believe Chicago, showed that among young men who were either previously incarcerated or history of violence in the community, receiving cash transfers after some time reported less fewer incidents of violence, and the communities also reported a reduction in violence. It reduces alcohol and drug consumption, child mortality, and skipped meals. One thing that I think was very exciting for me is one of the things that cash transfer studies have shown is that it actually reduces, in some cases, the amount of time that people spend working. When you hear that, it's very easy to go up in arms and say, you see, makes people lazy. The first study on that came out from Europe recently, and it had like a really bold statement: cash transfers reduces the amount of time people spend working. Very sensational headline, right? But when you read the paper, what the researchers were saying is that they found that mothers of especially young children worked fewer hours after they received the cash transfer. And the reason they did that, and the women say this, is because now I have a little bit excess, so I can spend time with my child, nurturing the child. So I am still working, but fewer hours, so that I can be available to nurture my child. Absolutely amazing finding. Interestingly, we found the same thing in one of the studies that we have that was done in Kenya. The results were just published this week. What it found was a lot of women, after receiving cash transfers, instead of going out to work, started a business at home so they could run this business that was generating income for the family while being proximal to their young child at home. The other thing that we've also seen repeatedly in all the countries where we've worked is, for a number of people, while it doesn't increase the hours people spend working, people actually change the areas in which they work. A number of people move from being employed to being self-employed. So it looks like the work hours are not increasing, but people are actually becoming more productive. They now run their own business, which means they're able to employ people in the community. They're able to take on jobs that have better wages than because previously they had no fallback plans, anything that gave any money they were willing to take. But now, because they have a cushion, they are more likely to take on jobs that pay them better, and therefore the quality of their lives increase. I mean, the dynamics through which cash transfers work is absolutely amazing. This is just a quick spotlight.
There is a question actually that's popping up in my mind as you talk about this, and then knowing that you guys do try to restrict yourselves, and especially in communications, to spending less money. But this information is astounding. And why? I mean, are people not interested in it because it goes against what people assume, is going to happen if you just give people cash? It is just, I mean, I'm hearing you. I mean, it's what turned me to see if I could get somebody from Give Directly, on this series. But it's just, now hearing you live is just, it is just, as I say, astounding that all of the, if you will, conservative, shoulders arched back, that won't work is just not true. And so I just don't get why this isn't published or I mean, yelled from the mountaintops.
You're absolutely right, Brooke. And I think this goes back to the saying that the eyes see what they know. You know how sometimes you meet someone that you haven't seen for a while, and then it seems like every time you turn a corner, they're right there before you. So I think, a lot of people may not have heard of the concept of cash transfers. And if they have heard it, they have either heard it from a biased point of view, or the instinctual response, like I also did when I first heard about cash transfers, is, does it really work? There's someone was telling me of a study that was published in the US. I need to find that, and Brooke, if I find it, I will send you the link to that paper so you can share it to with those who want. A survey that was done in the US, and the question was just trying to understand from the general public, which are the groups of people that you hate, that people hate. What was interesting was that poor people were some of the least hated people. People didn't hate poor people. But then people receiving welfare were I believe it was the most hated group of people. And so the question was, why do people hate people receiving welfare? People hate people receiving welfare because they believe that people who receive welfare are poor, are lazy people. They are poor because they are lazy and they're waiting, sitting back on their backsides, waiting to use money that other people have earned. But unless you have lived, and by living, I mean had close interactions with people living in poverty, then you understand that it is deeper than what we think. Once again, birth is the first lottery. A lot of people find themselves where they are because the circumstances of their birth was so low that their platform, their springboard was not strong enough to push them to the heights that they could have otherwise gone. I mean, in this, when I went to high school, like I said, it was an exclusive girls' Catholic school. There were children who came in on scholarship from really poor backgrounds. But because they got the opportunity to be in this place that gave them what they otherwise would not have afforded, they've grown up right now to be like very outstanding people in the community. I mean, when I think about some of them, I just get goosebumps. So once again, to answer your question, why are people not excited about this? It's because generally, some people don't know, and it takes forums like this for those of us who work in this kind of space to talk about the work that we are doing as an organization. And so it's also one of the reasons why we are in spaces like LinkedIn, we're in spaces like Facebook, places like Twitter, to bring this message out and to tell people what we have seen happening. So we work with these people living in poverty. We've seen the changes that can happen in their lives. And so we're trying to tell other people what we have seen consequently. But it's still work in progress. And hopefully we can get ambassadors from people who have listened to us to tell other people about what is possible with cash transfers for people living in poverty.
It's phenomenal. Absolutely. I have a question, and because you work so much elsewhere and not here, you may say, gosh, I don't know what's going on there. But Give Directly does fund a program here in Michigan, in Flint, Michigan, on mothers and babies. And I don't know how long it's been going. I just know that in some of the research it turned up. Do you know anything about that program?
Yes, so maybe what I can do, Brooke, let me stop showing this and just move on to what we're doing in the US. Would that be great?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay.
Unless else, let me just see if anybody's adding to they're not adding to the chat. I don't want to take over just because, you can hear me. but that did, as you're talking about these and just and the programs here are just so hard to get off the ground. So anyway,
yeah. No, happy to move to that. That's let me just sort of summarize this slide. It's already up here.
We're about at 8:10. So
okay. Right. So one of the other things that we do is we like trying like really bold and daring things. So in 2019, we decided to just try it out and said, what if you gave $1,000 to every refugee household in a settlement? What would happen? And so we did just that. Uganda hosts some of the largest number of refugees in the world. And so we picked a refugee settlement, which has a lot of people from Southern Sudan. And in each of the 10,000 households in that settlement, we gave $1,000 and also to 5,000 host communities and had that evaluated with a very rigorous A/B testing style design. And what we found was the way the refugees spent their cash transfers was not different from the way the Ugandans spent their cash transfers. People were able to, let me just see if they can, the summary slide here. Their consumption went up. Suddenly people were able to pay tuition, spend on food, improve the quality of houses they were living in. Business ownership went up and business earnings went up. So not surprising, because refugees are not different from you and me. It just happens that the circumstances in their homes forced them to move elsewhere. One of the things we are told is it's good to give people financial business training and stuff before we give cash. And some of the refugees told us, one particular one said, in my country, I was a lawyer. So it's not like I don't know what to do. Another one was a medical doctor. Like, we just don't have the money, but we don't need any training because we already have very high level training. So I will stop sharing what we're doing in the rest of the world and fly to the US in a few seconds.
Okay, before we leave there, because somebody did ask a question, I think it's, let me go back, my brain, I've got just one, let's see here, where's the check? Well, I think the question was, why are Uganda and maybe Kenya needy?
Can you repeat the question?
And Thomas, come on here, because I think it's your, there we are. Yeah. Why are Uganda and Kenya poor and needy?
Good question. So I've given a lot of examples from the work that we've done in Uganda and Kenya, but we are in 14 countries around the world, and not just because we want to, it's only the 14 countries that are needed, it's because the money that we have is not enough to go around. People, the most recent data from the World Bank is that close to 700 million people in the world are living in extreme poverty. And so the example, like I've just decided to stop and move to the US because if I was to go through each of the countries we're working in, the story is the same. It is the same. Even in the US, like I said, initially we didn't have programs in the US, but now we have programs in the US, and the demand is unbelievable. Even there, we are not able to. We don't have enough cash, and we're working with with city councils as well. That's not enough money to give everyone living in poverty. And so the need is around us. It is every single place. I lived in the US, in San Francisco for a while, and I've not seen that level of homelessness anywhere in the world. And I have traveled a lot. I have not seen that level of homelessness anywhere in the world. So the problem is everywhere. And if I had a day to sit with you, I could just go country by country and you'd see the level of need that is there. What I've tried to present to you is our projects that have been evaluated using rigorous experimental designs so that you can see what the before and the after look like. I hope that answers the question. Perfect. So, yes. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just try to stop sharing it and then redo it so that it's easy for me to see it as well. So I'm not looking at multiple screens at the same time.
Fine.
Okay, there you go. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Give directly, give, and then
Okay.
countries, it looks like. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Just a second. Just want to make sure that I have the screen in one place. Give me a moment. I'm looking at two screens, so I want to put it in one place. Okay, there we go. So Give Directly's work in the US. I've already talked about this, but these are some of the families. So this was in, you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is one of the families that were our beneficiaries in Puerto Rico. We responded to one of a hurricane disaster situation, and this is one of the families that received cash transfers from our programs. I'll skip this and just go straight to our work in the US. So since 2017, Give Directly has committed up to $280 million to low-income Americans. And then we are also working with local governments to administer 3 of the nation's largest cash transfer programs. Our first program in the US was a domestic disaster response. That was a response to the COVID pandemic, where we were using the donations that we had from, for instance, Google. We transferred cash to households that were vastly affected by the pandemic during the pandemic, to help them meet their immediate needs, food, and whatever other needs that they had immediately. Then we also have a guaranteed income program for Black women in Georgia. And this, the first site for this project was the Old Fourth Ward, which was the neighborhood where Martin Luther King grew up. But we got more funding over time for this project, and it has expanded to include more people in Georgia. It's called the Georgia, so we're working in partnership with the Georgia Resilience Fund. What we are seeing in this project, so one of the things we're doing in this project is through research, we're trying to understand what the needs of people living in poverty are in that setting and what they use their cash transfers for. And remember, I told you that a lot of the recipients in Africa and in our Asian settings use their money to improve the quality of their households, of their houses, their physical houses. We found the same is happening in the US. People are using it to pay rent. people are using it to move to a better quality house for themselves and for their children. So in a sense, while we are in different continents, people are not very different from each other. The Chicago Resilient Communities pilot that has also been going on, reaching up to 5,000 low-income people in Chicago with $500 a month. And then the Cook County Promise, which is the largest guaranteed income program in the US. We're also working with that. Flint that you mentioned, Brooke, is one of our newer projects. Will come later, but one of the newer projects that we are working in, and what we're doing in Flint is it's called the Treat Kids program. Households that so women who are pregnant are enrolled into the program, and they receive cash transfers. This comes on the basis that evidence has shown that children in households that are supported with a cash transfer end up better than their contemporaries who are living in households that are not supported with a cash transfer. So they end up getting more years of education, and at the end of the day, they get better employed jobs, and therefore you kill the cycle of poverty. You're trying, so what the cash transfers are doing in this case is that it is changing the birth lottery. The fact that people were born in poverty means they don't have to live in poverty, and if their lives are made better, then their children are not going to grow up in the same situation that they grow in. So this year, some of the things we've focused in the US is emergency relief and disaster response. We have a team in the US that is prepared for disaster responses in the US, whether it is hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever it is, another pandemic, God forbid. But we have a team that is poised and ready to respond to that in the US setting. We also have programs now that are more targeted cash designs, and this is usually to fill the gaps in evidence. Research on cash transfers are robust in many parts of the world, but not so in the US. Multiple pilots going on, multiple questions still being answered. And so we have a setup in the US that is focused on filling the evidence gap in cash. And my team also supports that. Questions like, what is the right cash transfer amount to give to people living in poverty with children? What is the right cash transfer amount to give to people who are homeless? So all those different things, and what is the best way so what's the best design? Do you give it as a lump sum? Do you give it as multiple transfers over time? So those kind of questions, what is the way to measure the outcomes that the cash transfers drive? Because one thing about cash is that because it is unconditional and people being human beings have varying needs, you cannot guess what outcome it is going to push. I'll give you an example. In one of our programs, family living in a dilapidated house, and when they received cash, the question was, what are you going to use this first for? Automatically, everyone was like, they're going to, of course, repair the house. And the lady was like, no, I'm going to make sure that I have a reliable source of food for my children. So people's needs and priorities vary. And so the question is, what are the ways in which we are going to identify what matters most to recipients and measure this realistically within the setting of a research project? And then government guaranteed income and benefits. So one of the things that we are doing as an organization now is because we have mastered the art of cash transfers efficiently and fast and correctly targeted, we are now working with local governments to support and test the transition of guaranteed income pilots to permanence, to benchmark cash to inform the way public policies are made, so that public policies are made on a solid ground of evidence. So we're working in that space within the US as well. So these are some of the projects that we've worked on. So the In Her Hands project, phase 2, with the first, so this is the program in Georgia. We've now got funding to extend this program going forward to more women or to more households. So while this program is a predominantly Black program, it is not only open to people, to Black people. So anyone living in that area, in those areas in Georgia, who is a parent who is looking after young children 18 or children, of course, 0 to 18, and are living in poverty are welcome to register for the program. Our disaster response fund, we're building that up. We've learned a lot through our response to the hurricane in Puerto Rico and to the COVID pandemic. The Flint Treat Kids, I already talked about that, where we're giving cash transfers to provide support to mothers and children. This is also being rigorously evaluated. And one of the things we're looking at is to study what the long-term impacts of cash transfers in that community is going to look like. We also have a setup to help people in financial shocks. Like many of us know, a lot of us are just one shock away from living in poverty. It may take a pandemic, it may take an illness in the family, and suddenly we all need support. And so we at Give Directly, we also have a program, Give Directly the US, to make sure that we are in a position to help people who are experiencing poverty as a result of a financial shock. And then also, at the start of the year, we were scoping programs to prevent evictions through smart targeted cash payments. And right now we are doing a project, we're calling it the Harris Project, which is supporting people who are in a situation of homelessness. And also benchmarking, like I said, cash to provide public benefits to people who need it. So that is what I prepared. I think one of the other things that I want us to remember is when we are talking about cash transfers, they tend to fall in two broad categories. There is the protective cash transfers and the productive cash transfers. By protective cash transfers, I mean things like a basic income. It may be a guaranteed income, that's terminology that is used. It might be a universal basic income. But what that is trying to do is to make sure that people don't go to bed hungry, to make sure that people have a roof over their heads, to make sure people have access to drinking water, to make sure people don't come home and their electricity is turned off. So in other words, it's protecting people from falling into a place where no human being should go. And so once people have that cushion, then anything else that they're able to earn will take them to another level. An example, you're working on a minimum, you have a job, minimum wage job, working maybe 80 hours a week. But if you have this basic income, then one, like we've already seen the research has shown, parents are able to be more available to their children, which is important, and nurturing for the children is important. But also people are able to advocate for better payments because they have a cushion, and therefore they're able to advocate for better payments. And also the extra money they get from the jobs that they have will help their families live a better quality of life. The other one is the productive cash transfers, and the productive cash transfers are aimed at helping people graduate out of poverty. As we all know, it is not enough to only be able to meet your basic needs. That it even has a negative impact on the mindset. If you go to bed and not sure if you're going to have enough money tomorrow to feed yourself or feed your family, that's a very poor quality of life. And so with the productive cash transfers, the hope is that when people receive it, in addition to meeting their basic needs, they have enough left over to invest it, to move away from a place where they just have enough to meet their basic needs to a place where they have enough to thrive, and also hopefully enough to give out and enough to start a business and employ other people and make the quality of life for other people better as well. Some of the impacts of cash transfers that we've seen that are really important to me and I believe to many people is what cash transfers does to the psychological well-being of people. It improves happiness. And that is not surprising. When you know that tomorrow my meal will be covered, my rent will be covered tomorrow, of course, your quality of life is going to go up, so that it improves the psychological well-being. Cash transfers have been shown to reduce child mortality simply because the parents are able to afford, one, to be present to nurture their children, two, they're able to meet the medical needs of their children, three, the children are feeding well. And so, I mean, imagine the gratitude families have if they know that their children are not going to die because they have, the parents have cushion that they can use to protect and save their families. I don't know if my time is up, but I'm open to questions, and yeah, you're welcome to ask any kind of questions, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Okay,
thank you.
There's one definitely which goes back to pre the discussion of the US, which was, and it's related to the Uganda and Kenya, being poor and needy. And now it's a clear now question, which is South Korea and Malaysia, the person is saying, we're able to create wealth. So is Uganda and Kenya, are they not creating wealth as a country? Is, so the question is, this program is just a transfer of wealth instead of helping Uganda create wealth. But is that because of the focus of the organization is not on nations, but on people?
That's a very good question. And once again, just letting you know, I use Uganda and Kenya. There are two countries in our program. The problem of poverty is all over the world. So just to make sure, it's not just Uganda and Kenya. I'm in Uganda, so it's easy to speak about my country, but we work in all these countries and we're seeing the same issues. But the question is, why doesn't the country just create wealth and everything will be okay? We had a very interesting discussion. We have a book club in the organization. We read different books on development. Yeah. Yeah, we have a book club. You will be very welcome. One time we were discussing a book, it was something about the poverty trap, and lots of comparisons were being made. Oh, the US is this, Europe is this, and Africa is the other. And my question was, I think we're comparing apples to bananas. Many of the countries that in many of the low income and middle income countries were colonized until recently. Uganda on Monday is going to just be 61 years old, right? 61 years since independence, right? So a lot of these countries were drained by the colonialist powers. And my question to the group was, where was the US 61 years after independence? What was the economic situation in the US 61 years after independence? And I just want us all to have that perspective. The US got independence in 1777, I believe. Exactly. Right. So it has had that amount of time to just develop as a country. Many of our low and middle income countries are still struggling with the post-colonial effects. I mean, a number of these countries are still even paying, for instance, to the Commonwealth. So we need to understand that that gap exists. The other thing is these countries are producing wealth. The governments are trying their best to provide the needs that people have. But our question as an organization is, are we going to sit and wait until the governments are able to provide for everyone? Or are we going to help people solve their problems now as the governments build what they need? We've seen many examples where we give cash transfers in a community, and because everyone in the community has received cash, the community comes together and says, let us build a market, let us put up a school for ourselves. So while the government is grappling with making sure the roads exist, making sure bigger schools exist, the communities themselves, because they've received cash transfers, are also able to meet the needs of their communities. The other thing is, like we've seen, is a lot of people who have received cash transfers invest in business, whether it is in the US, whether it is in Uganda, in Rwanda, Liberia, Nigeria, Morocco, Malawi, all the countries we work in. A lot of people invest in business. And what happens is that because they've invested in business, they're able to employ people who are either unemployed or people who have been working in places that are paying less than they're now able to pay. And so that way, people, because of cash transfers, the everyday person is able to contribute to the development of the country in which they live. So when we think of cash transfers, we need to think in terms of, can we help the individual in poverty right now while the bigger systems are being built? I mean, we've seen in places where we have done these climate disaster responses, whether it was in Puerto Rico, whether it was in Uganda, whether it was in Morocco, or it was in wherever. I mean, just 2 weeks ago, we were responding to the earthquake in Morocco. So are we going to sit back and say, you know what, it's the government's responsibility to make sure people have food. It's their responsibility to rebuild the houses. We shouldn't do anything for the individual. But we say, you know what, as the government repairs the buildings, as the government repairs the roads, let's help give people the opportunity to make choices that they need to make right now.
Yeah. I was just thinking about somebody's, has lost their home, but on their phone, they're getting $500. It's like, but
exactly,
that would do to your well-being. I mean, my gosh.
True. Exactly. Exactly.
It is a fascinating.
Brooke, I'll give another example. When there was that earthquake in Turkey and Syria recently, GIVE directly responded to Turkey. So one of the things that the immediate people on the ground said was, the economy had been destroyed. Even people who had businesses did not have stuff to sell to people who needed them. So Give Directly's response was to business owners. So we gave business owners cash transfers so that they could quickly rebuild their businesses, and the people in the community were now able to purchase the demands that they had. So just amazing what cash transfers can do. The option we could have had is saying, sit back and say it is the business of the government to make sure the economy is up and running.
Yeah.
But the question is, what can we do right now to make a difference in the lives of people?
Yeah, this is excellent. We are, I don't want to keep you awake any longer. This has been absolutely wonderful. I thought it was going to be very good. It's beyond that, Miriam. I mean, it's what the work that you're doing, and I wish everybody else could kind of chat here, but it's just, I mean, your heart just expands, and that this work is done and how it's being done, and the dignity and the respect that that individuals are receiving through this. I mean, it is phenomenal. You will be, actually, I did get somebody on the chat said, I'm going to give directly. So, you'll see that, there eventually. So this has been, yeah, just absolutely, just absolutely wonderful. Just
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Brooke. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. I think there are no questions left, but thank you very much, Miriam. This has been great. So I will email you about your funds, and where we should send, check, or however we should do that. So, but thank you very much. And I hope your child got back to sleep.
He did. He went back to sleep. And thank you, everyone. It's really been a pleasure sharing my experiences with you and just being in the same space as you are, although we're so many miles apart. And Brooke, thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely, Miriam. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And bye, everybody.